Just to, there you go. Now I've got the pleasure of introducing Kim and Juliana, who are our speakers this evening, addressing Who Will Hear Me, Ohio's campaign for Youth Ombudsman to investigate abuse experienced by children and teens. So a little bit about Kim and Juliana. Kim is a project manager at the Children's Defense Fund, Ohio, where her policy focuses on child welfare and behavioral health. She holds a master's degree in economics from The Ohio State University and works as an analyst, has worked as an analyst for the Ohio Office of Budget Management and Columbus State Community College, where she still teaches economics and helps to support the Scholar Network, which is a program for students who have been in foster care. Juliana is a former foster youth and aspiring physician. She has been an advocate on many different levels, as one is the government liaison for Action Ohio. She's also a member of Governor DeWine's Advisory Council on Children's Services Transformation, and also the Ohio Department of Medicaid Ohio RISE Advisory Committee. So Juliana has been an outspoken advocate in many areas to make an impact. Both Kim and Juliana are involved in the Youth Ombudsman Advocacy Campaign, and they're here to tell us more about the uphill battle that has been this year and different ways that you can get involved. So again, I will be putting links in the chat to some different resources. You'll also all get a follow-up email with those links, so don't worry if you don't capture them all this evening. So with that, I will hand it over to Juliana and Kim. Thank you.
Well, Juliana, I'll just start by kind of highlighting the overall, like kind of the bigger agenda that we'd like to talk about today. And, just so you guys are aware, we're kind of working in partnership with three major organizations that are kind of spearheading the campaign. So the Ohio Youth Advisory Board is one, and that is the group of 14 to, help me out, Juliana, 14 to 24-year-olds who are elected to be a part of kind of being the voice for current and recently former foster youth. So, and then Action Ohio, Juliana can talk a little bit more because she, like she mentioned, she's the government relations member of the Action Ohio. And then my organization, Children's Defense Fund Ohio, has many different policy areas that we focus on. So, we look at nutrition and health and just general child well-being across the state of Ohio. So we're a multi-issue organization, but this particular campaign has really become one of our top priorities. And so Juliana, do you want to talk a little bit more about the Action Ohio and what that stands for and who that represents?
Sure. And thanks, Betsy, for the introduction. So Action Ohio, I guess you could say it's for what comes beyond the Ohio YAB, so no longer youth, but it also includes allies as well, like Betsy and other allies throughout the state of Ohio.
Yeah, so we, the main couple of different things we wanted to do at this time is basically highlight why we think a youth ombudsman would help provide more protections for youth, and then kind of go over our vision for what that would look like. So what that youth ombudsman would ideally look like in practice. And then moving from there, we really want to talk about just kind of the strategy, like how are we doing? What's our progress so far in terms of this campaign? How, what obstacles we're facing in terms of establishing this ombudsman, and then give you guys some more information about ways you might be able to get involved if you're interested in participating in the campaign. And then, as Betsy said, we can do some question and answers as well. So, so with that, the big question is, why do youth need more protections, right? We have this elaborate system, many rules in place and regulations in place. So why is there a need for an additional layer or an alternative mechanism? And so what we've heard and, the information that we have gathered is that the current processes, the current safeguards are not working. They're failing youth. So, we have heard stories from children and youth who are experiencing difficulties in contacting their caseworker, or in some cases their guardian ad litem. When they do try to reach out and report some of the abuse to their local crisis lines, they're not being responded to in a timely way. So there's lengthy wait times, and then just a lack of follow-up from reports. So one of the things I think that has been so compelling to me as I've been, gotten involved with this campaign is just hearing from current and former foster youth about what they've experienced in this regard. And so, Juliana, I don't know if you wanted to talk more about what your experience has been in this regard and why you think, there is a need for more protections.
Sure, absolutely. So this initiative really resonates with me because of what occurred to me in my personal story. So I was abandoned by my mother at a very young age. And then I was forced to live with my father, who was really abusive. And Children's Services was involved in my life from a very young age, but there was never any lasting intervention. And despite numerous reports that my school had made on my behalf, just other interested people from the community had made on my behalf, and myself, there was nothing that ever had come about of that. And it wasn't until actually that my father had severely injured me that there was some sort of intervention from Children's Services. So what happened is my father had brutally assaulted me, and I ran away, and I found myself behind in the neighborhood behind one of the schools that I had attended. And I realized that I had nobody to call because the people that I had been taught to trust had not done anything for me. And so I didn't want to take that risk and reach out to them again if there wasn't going to be anything that would come of it, if they were going to just send me back home to my father, where I would continue to endure the abuse. Ultimately, I honestly did not have anybody to call, so I did end up calling them, but I didn't realize the extent of my injuries at the time. And I guess they were severe enough to be sufficient to put me into foster care. But I guess one of the most frustrating things that I encountered throughout the whole process, besides, the delayed intervention, was being questioned, why hadn't I reached out sooner? It was one of the most common questions that I was asked by people throughout the interview process, and just sometimes still in general in life. And it's really frustrating because I had reached out for help, but nothing had come of it. So, if there had been an office designed by and dedicated to solely serving youth, I think that would have prevented the years of abuse that I had endured, by providing this alternative mechanism where the Children's Services system had failed me. So that was my experience with the system. And just knowing, mine is not the only experience. I know, Kim, that you have heard a lot of other stories. And I'm just kind of wondering, what are some of those stories that really impacted you and caused you to join this initiative, this campaign?
Yeah, and thank you, Juliana, for sharing, so personally. And I've heard from other people too that it's through these types of campaigns that they can kind of start to make sense and make meaning of the things that have happened to them in the past. And so, there's a young woman who came to testify, and she talked about the ways that, so it's similar to Juliana's case, but then as a grown-up, she worked in one of the long-term care facilities. And so what she was able to do as an employee for one of these long-term care facilities, I don't know if you guys are familiar, but they also have an ombuds role that oversees those long-term care facilities, right? So when an elderly person is experiencing abuse, they have a place to go. And so she talked about how when she tried to report it up, the regular means it wasn't being heard, but when she was able to report it through this systematic place that kind of reviewed those things, that she had a lot more, it was very effective. So, that's compelling to me when we think about, if we can provide that for our elderly, can we also provide that for our teenagers? Because in many cases, that was an example of a residential facility, where she was working, but we have residential facilities for our teenagers too. And, there's another young woman, Nikki Chin, who has talked about some of the cases where there have been reports of abuse at some of these places. And there are staff people even who have been trying to elevate some of these concerns, and then the staff people get fired. So, and I think one thing that's important, what I find to be, helpful in understanding, why it's so important to have an ombudsman that's like independently investigating these things, is because, it's just kind of like a tendency within an institution to sweep things under the rug, because it's a lot more work to have to investigate those things. And there's just sort of like a momentum or an inertia that makes it very difficult for organizations within themselves to really do the full investigative process that's needed. And so when you take that outside of the agency, you take that into like an independent office, it gives somebody who has been trained as an investigator an ability to look at those things in a more like objective, and that's their specific role. So yeah, I think some of those stories, there's another young woman, Shar, who has testified on our behalf, and on behalf of the campaign as well. So just lots of young people have reinforced that this is a really important need from their perspective as far as the youth themselves. So I don't know, Juliana, do you want to talk a little bit more about kind of like how we see this showing up in the community at large, or kind of some of the data that we know about this?
Absolutely. I think that's a great question, because, in Ohio, we were already seeing abuse and neglect cases increasing before COVID had begun. In fact, there were over 200,000 referrals made in 2019 alone. And just knowing, with the pandemic related restrictions, children weren't being seen by the people who were normally involved in their lives, with going to school and whatnot. So that put them at a higher risk for child abuse and neglect because of that less frequent contact with mandated reporters. So as a result, many cases within the last year are going unreported. And what we're seeing now, our emergency rooms, like right here in Columbus, Ohio, are seeing an influx in the number of child abuse cases. So, the need for a statewide youth ombudsman, it predates the pandemic, but it's now even more critical than ever.
And I'll note too, it's really difficult to find data on, number of children who have been abused while in care. There are some national numbers that you can find on this, but, and there's actually, I should credit one of the young people who has been actually interning on the Hill at the national level. And she's basically made a policy recommendation that says that we need to do a better job collecting this data, because in Ohio, according to these official statistics, only like 4 out of every 1,000 children have experienced abuse while in care. What we know is that there are other studies that are more like a random sample of people that show closer to 1/3 of children have experienced some sort of a maltreatment while in care. So, we don't have systematic like national statistics at that level, but we know anecdotally, and when you hear from young people that it's much more prevalent than what is appearing in like the kind of official statistics. And so that's also something that we want to talk about, like how can a youth ombudsman office help to create better mechanisms to capture this, to capture the real, impact or the reality of what's happening. So with that, I really want to go into a little bit more about, okay, what is this youth ombudsman going to look like? What's the vision for, this youth ombudsman? And you may notice that we have been saying, whenever we say ombudsman, we say youth ombudsman. And so I want to ask you, Juliana, why is it so important for this office to specifically serve children and youth?
Yes, so the reason why it's so important for this office to be youth-centered, youth-specific, is because there are already numerous platforms that exist for adults to have their voices heard. So while those exist for adults, it often leaves children feeling alone and powerless and without a trusted resource to reach out for help. I can recall the words of one of the young persons who advocate with us, and I'm going to read her quote. It's "Youth are the ones whose lives are at the mercy of the system. Far too often, our voices are reduced to a file and then promptly ignored. These are not just words or a project to us. This is our lives, our rights, and our futures at stake." And I think that just was really impactful towards me.
Yeah, and so in the long term, we would love to see this office be a completely independent and autonomous office, somebody who is appointed by the governor with input by current and former foster youth. So when this person is selected, the people from the Ohio Youth Advisory Board would be given an opportunity to say, like, well, who's on the list? Who are you considering selecting? Can we talk to them? Can we be a part of the interview process? Can we ask them some questions? So that would be one piece of the vision, right? We want it to be youth specific. So because many people also have said that there needs to be an ombudsman to investigate, reports made by adults. And while we are not in any way disagreeing with that, it can become a conflict of interest, and it's also so there is an example of potentially like a young person and an adult coming to the same both reporting. Okay, what does the ombudsman do in that case? There's a conflict of interest there. But there's also this tendency that if you allow adults to take over in a way, that the real message and the kind of core practice around the office will be geared towards adults. So for example, in West Virginia, they've kind of established an ombuds office. And if you look through their annual report, it kind of gives a list of all the different people who have made reports. You've got foster caregivers, you've got kinship caregivers, you've got caseworkers. 0 people who are actually living in the system, who are, 0 young people have made reports. Now, why is that? The practices and procedures of an organization are going to be geared towards certain populations. So do they require you to fax your complaint? That's one example of an office that you have to have, your complaint has to be faxed to the office in order for it to become official. So when we say we want it to be youth-centered, we want it to be going out to residential facilities and talking about it. How are they what kind of outreach are they doing to ensure that every youth in the system is aware that this office exists? So those are just examples of ways that an office who's youth-centered is going to have a different kind of way of operating, a different operations than if it were combined with adults. So that's the real vision, is that it would be youth-centered, informed by, so the selection process would be informed by youth, and the design, like while they're starting these practices, when they're hiring people, how much of that is going to have input by youth? And Julie, I don't know if you had any other examples of ways that you can see young people being able to influence the practices in terms of like trauma and being trauma informed, avoiding, retaliation, or any other examples of how when current and former foster youth have input, it might really change the way the office is designed.
Yeah, so I think just extending upon that is the idea of like meaningful contribution. So I think it's really hard when you only have like 1 or 2 youth that are being involved in an initiative, because really at that level, what kind of influence do they have? So I think that having it be, a youth empowering model that really allows them to be involved in the design, delivery, and evaluation of it, gives them the opportunity to, just really, really serve their needs, to understand them and to serve their needs.
Yeah. And talk a little bit more about how independence, how does that shape, like, why is that such a core value as far as the vision for an ombudsman?
So I think that when we talk about independence, we're saying that we wanted to have independent authority. So for it to operate effectively, we know that it must have the faith of the children and the youth, the faith of its leadership over them. So what's important about that is we know that the relationship between the community and children's services is just really delicate, and there's a lot of mistrust. And I think that because of that, not many youth are going to want to use this as a resource if it is operating beneath ODJFS or another state office. So with that, it has to operate independently of children's services, and then it must also have statutory authority. And so, Kim, can you kind of explain what statutory authority is and why it's so important?
Yeah, and so this is where we really come to the idea of this being a part of the legislative process. We want there to be a bill that establishes what this ombudsman is able to do. So giving them, the authority to be able to investigate these complaints, have access to information that they wouldn't otherwise have. And in some cases, we would like for them to be able to act in certain ways in response to how a child is being treated. So, how can we give the office some statutory authority to be able to make decisions and intervene when necessary? But at the very basic level, what we're hoping is that it will be an appointed role, so that the ombudsman would be somebody who is not hired by, somebody who has kind of a role in the system, but would be a separately appointed entity so that they're more independent. And so I think so just in summary, we have 3 big kind of pieces of this vision: that it would be independent, that it would be youth specific, and that it would have, that designed by current and former foster youth, and having that role really embedded in the development of this office. I think we covered that. So where are we with our big ask? We've been working on this for a while. So Juliana, talk a little bit about kind of the campaign and how things have progressed so far.
Sure. So I actually want to back up to prior to this campaign. So with Action Ohio and the Ohio Yeah, we have actually been working on this initiative since late 2018. And then I joined in January of 2019. I actually think it was the first time that I might have met Betsy too at a meeting with Leanne Cornia, and she had just been appointed to her role, and Governor DeWine was just getting into office. So yeah, we started those efforts way back then, and the things that we have been asking for have remained consistent throughout this entire process. And you know, of the past year or so, we've really gained traction and have created this coalition. And through that, you know, we've held meetings with over 20 senators and 6 representatives. We've had almost a dozen alumni and allies, including Kim and myself, testify before the Ohio House of Representatives and the Ohio Senate. We've presented before the Children's Caucus. You know, we've met and we remain in communication with the sponsors of House Bill 4 and the sponsors of those individuals who have introduced amendments to House Bill 4 that specifically pertain to this Youth Ombudsman's office.
So House Bill 4, and I don't know, Betsy, I have one slide. I kind of spent a little bit of time on some graphic design to try to convey what House Bill 4 does and doesn't do for our goal and our vision. So I don't know if it's possible for me to share my screen.
I'm trying to make you a co-host, but it's not. Oh, Julius, you have to do that. I'm not a host.
It's okay if we can't do it, but I spent a little bit of time on my graphic design, so I was hoping I could use it. So House Bill 4, originally when we started this campaign, we were really hoping that we might be able to get something included in the budget bill, because everybody loves the budget bill because it passes every year, right? So it has a deadline, and a lot of times you can get language in there. And we had also heard, and when Governor DeWine released his blue book for the budget, he was clear that there was money included in the budget for an ombudsman office, or what they referred to as a children's services ombudsman, $1 million over the course of the biennium. So we looked through the bill, there was no language in the bill, and there hadn't been any appropriation authority set aside. But what we were able to glean from other conversations was that yes, JFS, the Department of Job and Family Services, does have some money available in their program operations to be able to fund at least the initial kind of startup of the office, to be able to kind of do a little bit of exploration and figure out how to proceed. So we originally tried to see if we could get something in House Bill 110, the budget bill, to see if they would be able to include some, like I said, statutory authority, right? We need statutory authority for this office to really have the ability to be effective. We were not able, that was not successful. So we did have some representatives in the House who were interested in sponsoring legislation related to this. They added an amendment, originally House Bill 4. And if you're really nerdy, if you want to go to the legislature and see House Bill 4, originally Action Ohio actually testified in support of House Bill 4 because it really focused in on the need for law enforcement to communicate with local county PCSAs. And that connection, that communication piece was really valuable. And so Action Ohio went to testify in support of House Bill 4. So after that, they added the ombudsman language to House Bill 4. So the ombudsman language basically says that it's a children's services ombudsman that is housed in JFS. And it doesn't really give a whole lot of substance as far as what their statutory authority is. So you can kind of imagine my fancy little graphic. It kind of shows you like what the check marks of like, what did it cover that we were excited about? Well, it did give us an ombudsman office at some level, but what it didn't do, it was not youth specific. It didn't really give any sort of at least any legislative authority for the Youth Advisory Board to have a role in how that office was developed. And it certainly wasn't independent, right? Because it was housed within JFS, it's under a program operations budget. When you think about independence, it's so important where the funding is and who has the ability to control the funding. Because if somebody can just say, okay, this isn't a priority for us anymore, and cut the funding, then that's a real serious dilemma, right? You need somebody who has the ability to speak truth to power without the risk of their funding being eliminated. So Juliana, tell us a little bit more about how our conversations have been going so far as trying to convey what the vision of the youth ombudsman is.
Yes, so our strategy currently has been to identify and cultivate legislative champions, and, through that, as we continue to work toward establishing the office, we are pursuing multiple pathways to achieve our goal. And so those include submitting a response to the amendment from Representatives Plummer and Manchester, which I believe, Kim, I think I saw that you had just done today. So hopefully we'll hear back soon about that. Alternatives to that include, seeking a different amendment that emphasizes that it's an appointed youth ombudsman, and pursuing then, if neither of those previous options end up working for us, pursuing a standalone bill that addresses issues, with the funding, location, and youth input.
Yeah. So, we've had a really good conversations with the sponsors. It passed. House Bill 4 has passed out of the House, so it is in the Senate now. So obviously, the Senate is going to have their own hearings, and potentially would entertain an amendment. So that's kind of what we're really hoping for, is that on the Senate side, we'll be able to have an amendment. And basically all we're asking for at this point is pretty simple. Like, we're not, of course, the overall vision, we would love for this to be independent, but we're kind of settling for the fact that, small steps, right? Incremental change. So if we can at least have a youth ombudsman who is a separately appointed, but peer. So there would be an ombudsman, and then for adults, because guaranteed we absolutely need to have somebody who can do this on behalf of caregivers, caseworkers, other people who are biological families. We need that for adults. We want to have an separate and equal youth-centered ombudsman. So that's really what we're hoping to do and accomplish with this next amendment through the Senate. So we'll see how we've been working hard. So that's kind of where, we just wanted to give you kind of some ideas. And, if you're interested in talking more about this, learning more about it, or getting involved in any way, we do have a couple of opportunities. So Juliana, do you want to talk about the letters that we've created?
Sure. Sorry. So we have two different ways that you can be involved. The first is we have a petition for individuals that you can sign on change.org to show your support. And we also have a community sign-on letter. So if you're a state, local, or national organization who is interested in supporting our efforts, you can sign the community show of support letter. And I will actually sit here and put those links in the chat box right now. So Kim, how are things going with like identifying legislative champions, and how can those who are interested be involved in those efforts?
So we are still on the Senate side. We're still hoping to find somebody in the Senate Judiciary who. So when it moved from the House to the Senate, it got assigned to the subcommittee called the Senate Judiciary. I hope this isn't way too technical, but I love this policy stuff. So, but we are hoping that we'll find somebody in that. So we'll regularly reach out to different senators and say, would you be willing to talk to us? We've got some people who have really, compelling stories. We'd love to share with you why this is so important. So usually we do those on Mondays. And so if anybody would be interested, being a part of those and just seeing what it's like, it's all virtual, although we have done a few in person, but usually it's just a virtual meeting. They give us about 15 minutes. Sometimes the senator will show up. A lot of times it's just their aide. But we, like to be able to just pass that information along. So we're still hoping to find somebody who's willing to kind of champion the amendment. We do have somebody on the House side who might be willing to do a standalone bill. So that would be kind of, if House Bill 4, depending on what happens with House Bill 4, that's kind of another backup plan. It's like, how can we maybe start something on a separate pathway to get through the legislature? So yeah, that's an ongoing thing. And then, also, when House Bill 4 has testimony, we're definitely going to show up and tell people what clarify, a little bit more about why it's so important for it to be youth specific and why it's so important to have youth involved, so that really is a place. And I think the bottom line for me that I find to be, really persuasive is that we want this office to be something that the youth can trust. Like we've been advocating for this for years. And if it gets created in such a way that it's just not a welcoming, it's not a place where peers will recommend it. So we have youth on the Youth Advisory Board who have said, I want to be able to recommend this to my peers. And that's what we're really aiming for. How can we build this in such a way that it gains traction and gets the word out among young people as a place that it's sensitive, like they'll listen to you, they'll take you, they'll be trauma informed, there'll be, emphasis on outreach and, those types of things. So that's really the bottom line as far as like, can we have this be something that is recommended by young people? So that, I think I'm going to pause there, unless Juliana, did you have any other points that you wanted to make?
I do not. I was going to say we can open the floor to questions, but I do actually already see a question in there, and I'm just going to read it aloud. It's from Bethany Murray, and it says, how many youth ombudsman offices would there be for the state of Ohio? And would each county have one, or would there be a couple for the state? So Kim, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, so they're in the current vision. So I don't know. I think that would be definitely something that we would need to kind of get input on. I don't think that we have a recommendation around the number. The current way that House Bill 4 is drafted, it allows for regional ombudsman. And so if you've done any, if you're familiar at all with how the long-term care ombudsman works, I want to say that there are 12 regions, and they're actually contracted out to different community-based organizations who kind of house the regional ombuds people throughout the state. So I think that that's kind of one way that it could be set up. Juliana, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think that one of the challenges that we're working with are the limitations of the budget. So as it's in right now, or the funding that's within ODJFS that's set aside for this, $1 million doesn't go very far. So I think that we just have to be cognizant of that as we're starting out. But as Kim also said, we're willing to compromise on things. I think if we can get even just one youth ombudsman to start with, that's a start, and then make steps. I could also see it being regional as well, so you would have one who would oversee the regional. Any other questions?
I have a question, but before that, even just in case any of our participants are less familiar with legislature, I knew when I was first new to public policy issues here in Ohio, a lot of people hear senators and representatives and they think about people in Washington, D.C. People tell me often, oh, I know who my senator is, it's Sherrod Brown. And so this evening we're talking about the state legislature, so they're all in Columbus. And I know that you guys said that, but just to hammer that point home. So it's not, if you wanted to go down on a Monday, it's not like you'd be going to DC, you'd be driving to Columbus. You have a state representative and a state senator, and those are people that need to understand these issues. And everybody has to start somewhere. So even if you're new at this is definitely an opportunity to learn the ropes and get introduced. And legislators are just people, and they need to know more about this, and so you're an expert maybe in a way, that this might be a new issue to them. So I invite everybody to participate. A couple of questions that I had. One is, can you talk about the Youth Bill of Rights? I know that House Bill 110, the Ohio budget, also had language about establishing a Youth Bill of Rights. And so where does that stand?
Gosh, Kim, I don't know if you would be better suited to answer this, but I'll give it a go. I know that there was an existing Youth Bill of Rights that had been created with the help of Ohio YAB, and I know that there were talks of obviously revising that, updating it. So I'm not actually sure what the current status of that is. Are you aware, Kim?
I know that they want to put it into the administrative code. So that I don't think has gone through. So, there was a kind of a manual. I think it was called originally, there's probably somebody that knows a lot more about this on the call. So if you want to jump in, but yeah, so there was sort of a youth manual that has been modified with input, like Juliana said, with input from the Youth Advisory Board. So that then needs to go through kind of the whole rules clearance process to be established in administrative code. So I don't think it's gone all the way through. That's a several stage process with period of review for comments. So if anybody else knows exactly where it is within that process, I don't know for sure.
Yeah, this is Karen McGordley, and I can speak to that. I'm with the Office of Families and Children. So I can tell you the Youth Bill of Rights, we actually drafted a new version of that, and thankfully we were able to receive a lot of good input through Action Ohio. Lisa Dixon set up a couple of youth forums so that youth could give their input into that. And it was, Juliana's correct, it was based on previously what we called children's rights, but now it's going to be a foster youth bill of rights. And it actually is almost through the rule process, and with a goal date of it's either November 1st or November 11th that it would be effective. So we're pretty excited on that. And then Kim, to your point, yes, there is a youth rights handbook. And part of this process, of course, is that we know we need to update that handbook to include these updated rights. And so that work has started internally. And then, of course, again, the next step for that would be, again, to make sure that we send it out to the youth, because again, they've always been a big part of creating this handbook since its first iteration. And don't have a time frame on that one yet, because I think there's a lot of different changes that they want to make to that handbook. And so we want to really be thoughtful and inclusive as we're, proceeding with updating that so that it's meaningful for the youth. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really great. I was kind of referring, I was thinking of you when I said that. So thank you for jumping in.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. And what I wanted to say, I wasn't really sure what the status was going on with that, but there is a connection between the Youth Bill of Rights and this Ombudsman office. So while the Youth Bill of Rights has existed in the past, or some iteration of it has existed in the past, putting it into code is so important because it hasn't been enforceable. So, some of the things that are written in there, it's not just about normalcy and whatnot, but it's also about the rights of having the right to a safe environment, to grow up in a safe environment. So I think that where the system fails to intervene, that's when this foster youth bill of rights would come into play, so that some accountability can be held to that.
Thank you. Kim, sorry for the technical problems that we had earlier. You are now a co-host. I don't know if the moment has come and gone, but if you want to share your graphic briefly before we end, you've got the
Thank
ability.
you. Yeah, I'll do my.
Sorry, we were trying to work that out in the background.
Okay, so hopefully there wasn't too much hype and you're not disappointed. So here's basically what the before picture. Okay, so our initial proposal, are you guys seeing this okay, where it says Youth Ombudsman proposal? So when we initially proposed it, we wanted it to be a youth ombudsman, but what we got was a children's services ombudsman. And we wanted there to be that input, as I mentioned, and we wanted it to be independent. So this is kind of how we see House Bill 4 missing the mark. And so, we were able to kind of have these conversations and try to get to a place of agreement with the sponsors. And where we landed was, okay, we're not going to get it to be independent. We realize that, that's maybe a longer term objective. But could we make this youth ombudsman to be a peer that serves alongside of an adult serving ombudsman? So we're not going to get this wish list over here, but could we get this? And right now, the response is maybe we could do it this way. And so this is where you would have an assistant ombudsman that would be dedicated to youth, which is not ideal. And there's a few reasons for that. One is that, this is a person who's now going to be hired on, by somebody else, and in a kind of not on a leadership role. So if they're not appointed, then they're not going to be able to kind of make the decisions about staffing. So like we said, if we want the youth ombudsman to really reflect the values of youth input, having somebody who's appointed and has the ability to make leadership kind of level decisions, we feel like will really help to create that culture and to implement the design in a way that is effective. So this is where we're kind of still working to maybe move it into this area over here where they're at that equal level. So that's kind of our strategy right now. And I'm gonna see if I can stop sharing. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really helpful. We have a couple minutes left, time for maybe one or two more questions if anybody else has anything. Okay, I don't know that there was any other questions in the chat. Any final comments or points that you'd like to make, Kim or Juliana? maybe reiterate how people can get involved if they'd like to. I know you guys can use all the support that you can get. Adoption Network Cleveland is on board to support this and do everything that we can do to help. And we need lots of people on board.
Yeah, I'm gonna put my email address. Oh, no, don't use that one. Sorry, I have to. So I actually met Juliana and I met through Columbus State, and I just gave you my Columbus State email, which I still check. I still have teach there, but I'm gonna give you my Children's Defense Fund email address. And definitely just reach out to us. Let us know if you're interested. We'll just put you on our kind of mailing list. We don't have like a systematic way of communicating yet, but we periodically will email the group and give updates. And then, yeah, just if you're interested in, like I said, these virtual legislative meetings, real easy to access. You just click in, just like this, you just log into a Zoom meeting and then there's a legislator there. So it's super easy.
I think just echoing Kim, if you have any questions or anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And then I did put the link to the sign-on letter and the petitions in the chat box. If you're interested in, even if you don't want to sign them or anything like that, just interested in looking them over, they're there for your viewing.
And I'd be curious if any of you have heard of this, or have had any experience, if anybody has any kind of reflections that they want to share, I'd be interested to hear that too.
We of course welcome any feedback.
Yeah, we've done a lot of research around different ombuds offices that haven't been implemented in other states. So, we've looked at Colorado. I know Maine has an ombuds office, and it's really interesting. Like they're all really different and have been, there's many, many different ways that you can implement these in different kind of branches of the government. So, some of them have been in the judicial branch. Some of them, California actually is one example that's kind of like got some of the aspects that we love because it is a youth ombudsman. It was a campaign very similar to ours that got that established, but it's in their social services, in their children's services agency. So it doesn't have that independent piece. So it's been a very, we haven't found that state that's like, we want this,
Well, that's really helpful. And California is sometimes a good example for Ohio because, as you are probably aware, Ohio has a county administered child welfare system. And so we, instead of it being state centralized like it is in the majority of states in our country, Ohio has 88 counties and sometimes 88 different ways of doing things. And California is one of the states that also has that county-based system. So sometimes they're a good parallel for ideas for us. I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. If anybody is watching this video and has any questions, or I don't know if people will be able to see the chat or not, but you can always reach me through Adoption Network at betsy.norris.adoptionnetwork.org if you don't see the other email addresses that got put in here, and I will point you in the right direction, whatever the timing is of that. We did also put our public policy agenda in the chat, and this is one of a handful of issues that we're working on this year through Adoption Network. So if you're interested and want to see some of the others, you can take a look at that. And I'm going to put the calendar here of other programs in the chat coming up as well. So thank you to everybody who joined us this evening. And Juliana and Kim, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your deep knowledge, and Juliana, your personal, painful personal experience. It really means a lot that you're willing to share that and care so much about this that you'll talk about that publicly. As people I think are probably aware, many of you know Adoption Network Cleveland is a nonprofit organization that serves individuals and families impacted by adoption, kinship, and foster care through support, education, and advocacy. We hope that you get involved. We're a membership organization. You can check out our website for ways to get involved or to join. And we do have another Monday evening speaker series in a couple weeks on October 18th. The details are on our website, and so we hope to see you then. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having us.
You're welcome.
Great.
Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thanks.
Bye.
So that was great. Thank you so much for doing that.
Very welcome. Thanks for giving us the platform.
Yeah, so, we'll see. There were some people who I think are new. There was one person here who is an adoptive mom who has been kind of peripherally involved in Adoption Network over the years, but never really directly. And I was interested to see that she signed up. Her child's an adult now and was internationally adopted. So, but I know she likes a lot of social justice issues. So she's somebody that might jump in and get involved, even though it's a little different situation.
Yeah.
I only recognized one name out of there.
Okay.
That was Karen.
Oh, okay.
I
There
didn't
were
know
several people I
anybody else.
didn't recognize, so I wasn't sure if maybe you guys might know them. I know.
I know Shauna. Shauna was one of the people who testified.
Okay.
She's with the Junior League.
Oh, okay, good.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. Well, I hope this gets some traction and
Yeah, and we'll have the recording so we can share it.
yes, so the recording will definitely be out there. Julius, are you still having technical difficulties?
what do you mean?
No, actually what I've realized is something happened with my mouse and it's sort of like
Oh, maybe you're
half
back.
froze. So I could hear and I could see everybody, but I couldn't like do anything. I couldn't like click